2 weeks ago, Brian over at Bookish made a video titled, "Why is everything so terrible now?" And he talked mostly about the widespread perception of Americans that the economy has never been so dire as it is now in election year 2024. And he explained very correctly why it is not that bad as many people would like you to believe. However, he suggested that the "why is everything so terrible now" feeling is especially present in the United States and maybe also in the United Kingdom. It might be primarily the economy, but I listened to the New York Times podcast, The Daily. They had a show last Monday in which they reported that former President Donald Trump leads President Joe Biden in 5 of 6 swing states, and that Mr. Biden is losing primarily young voters, Black and Latino voters who want change. Others believe that American democracy is at stake if Mr. Trump won the elections in November this year. Different from 2016, when the former TV star was surprised when elected, they say that the ultra-right is now much better prepared. The Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank in Washington, D.C., had already in 2016 and 17 selected staff for the Trump administration. But this time, they know that permanent change needs a more radical approach. In their so-called Project 2025, they say, quote unquote, "If we are going to rescue the country from the grip of the radical left, we need both a governing agenda and the right people in place, ready to carry this agenda out on day one of the next conservative administration." The Heritage Foundation has published its playbook, and it's called Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. I want to give you just one more quote from this 900-page manifesto. "The next conservative president must make the institutions of American civil society hard targets for woke cultural warriors. This starts with deleting the terms sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights, and any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights out of every federal rule, agency regulation, contract, grant, regulation, and piece of legislation that exists." End of quote. That is what is to come, what they are planning when Donald Trump wins the next elections. After I had seen Brian's video, it was clear to me that I had to continue the discussion and also add a little bit of a European perspective. Last Christmas, the president of the Federal Republic of Germany, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, started his yearly speech to the nation by saying that he had met so many people from all walks of life in 2023 that had told him that they had stopped listening to or watching the news because there was nothing good anymore and only lots of bad news. News about climate change, news about the far right gaining votes all across the northern hemisphere, at least, of our planet, news about the Russian imperialist army committing horrible war crimes in Ukraine on a daily basis, news about the prices for energy, for housing and groceries rising to new record levels, and news about salary increases that are far from offsetting the rise in prices, leading to a de facto reduction in purchasing power and prosperity. It might be the first time in the younger history of Germany or Sweden or Belgium or Italy, for example, where it seems very likely that the lives of our children and of our grandchildren will not be better than our own lives. What is already happening is that the middle class and its well-being, and compared to many other countries across the world, even its wealth is shrinking. A lot of people have worked all of their lives. They have worked for 40 and 45 years, and once they retire, the living standard is falling. And some of them realize right now that the trip that they took to Spain, to Italy, or Portugal before the pandemic in 2020 might have been the last one. They simply cannot afford another one. At the same time, more and more refugees and migrants are coming in a steady stream to Germany, and municipalities and counties are in many cases out of resources, housing and kindergarten places. They simply have no room, no space anymore. A troublesome us versus them feeling has come up for some people who believe right-wing propagandists that the migrants are stealing away the fruits for which the middle class has worked for all of their lives. Mixed with news of sometimes very violent crimes committed by single migrants. The ruling politicians, they seem to have lost their understanding for the needs and for the reality and for the problems of the average citizens who fear that their way of living is not getting better, but is getting worse. To tell a lot of them that they are way better off than 90% of the world population will not help. It will not be understood. I am not living in Ghana or Nicaragua. I am living in Germany. Someone told me recently. In these times we live in, we have politicians or interest groups, at least in the northern hemisphere, that fuel this feeling of disarray and unrest in order to get to power, to enlarge their electorate. There's one point in which Vladimir Putin, the German ultra-right-wing AfD, the British Brexiteers, and all Trumpers in the United States completely agree upon. Everything was better in the past. They suggest that it is possible to turn back time, to restore the traditional values of the Russian society, where a man and a woman are the core unit of a family, where what they call wokeism was not prevailing and where people were God-fearing and decent. Vladimir Putin attempts to go back in time and make Russia great again, as great as it was before the dissolving of the Soviet Union in 1991, where Russia dominated 14 other countries in the greatest empire on earth. Make America great again is also Donald Trump's mission. Take the country back to a time where female locker rooms were open just to him and not for trans women who stopped generic females from winning trophies. Back to a time when the country was segregated and where there was no talking about that white people would end up being a minority in this country, in the United States, in around about 20 years to come, 2045. Back to a time where no one was openly critical about police departments throughout the country and where Black Lives Matter simply did not exist. Today, thousands of books are banned in different states of the United States, most of all in Florida. The German AfD leader Bernd Höcke, who wants to become prime minister in Thuringia, has announced that he will rip off the contract for state media in this German state, and also he wants to defund the Secret Service that is currently investigating his very own party for being anti-constitutional. They all admire the Russian president because he, Vladimir Putin, has achieved that his opponents are either living abroad in exile, they are either jailed, or they are simply dead. We have a lot of fellow countrymen, and a little less countrywomen, I have to say, who not longer hold democracy as that important and benevolent to their very own situation. The British Prime Minister, former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill once said, "Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time." A lot of us, though, seem to have lost their belief in what Winston Churchill meant in the 1940s. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948, one of the most beautiful documents ever, I think, says, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights." How far have we moved away from that sentence that was actually signed by the representatives of 48 countries, among them the United States of America, the United Kingdom, France, Canada, Australia, Mexico, and Brazil, with some countries like the Soviet Union, the Ukrainian SSR, the Belarusian SSR, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Saudi Arabia, and South Africa, apartheid South Africa, voting against. When I see American so-called news channels, I sometimes get the impression that outlets like Fox News do not believe in the equality of all human beings born equal. Their main issue is migrants, 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 and they try to instigate fear and anxiety and prejudices into people living in America. They create an enormous us versus them feeling that is not healthy for a democratic country. Both the American and the European migrant problem or crisis need to be addressed. That's absolutely sure. As I said earlier, many municipalities in Germany, where I come from, cannot accommodate more people and families in Germany. We do not have the resources to welcome and integrate each and everyone. The only solution to this mass migration of our time is to help the people where they come from, to enhance their lives at home. We have profited from these countries being poor for decades and sometimes even for centuries, and we believed we could keep those we kept poor out of our neighborhoods, out of our countries, out of our borders. These times are gone, they're long gone, and people are knocking on our doors. On a daily basis, they risk their lives by walking through the Darien jungle between Colombia and Panama, by riding on a train through Mexico called the Beast, or by trying to cross the Mediterranean in poorly suited boats over to Europe, to Italy and to Greece. We cannot welcome everybody, but we are obliged to help them in their home countries, and we need to treat everyone that comes to us with dignity and respect, which does not mean that we turn our heads to crime. Of course not. The vast majority of people, though, that is trying to come, they are poor and decent folks and families. They are our brothers and sisters. Guys, I could carry on. I haven't talked about climate change and how we will need to change our daily lives now and forever if we want to give this planet in an acceptable condition, if we want to leave this planet in an acceptable condition to our next generations to come. If you are still with me, I have a little list of books that are describing our current situation, both in nonfiction and fiction. So please stay with me another 4 minutes. Since democracy is at stake, really at stake, 3 titles about this topic. In her 2020 book, Twilight of Democracy, The Seductive Lure of Authoritarianism, the American-Polish journalist Applebaum has described the rise of the right, the far right-wing movements in Poland, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Hungary. She focused on the intellectuals that have turned right and far right, and she shows also how they pave the way for the anti-democratic movements. A very important book by Anne Applebaum. Go and read this. The Yale historian, Professor Timothy Snyder, one of the greatest experts on Russian and Ukrainian history, explains the great divide of our societies with his 2018 analysis, The Road to Unfreedom, Russia, Europe, America, by saying that the basic contradicting sides are the politics of eternity versus the politics of inevitability, and the conflict between them that today on almost all fields is fueled by Russia and its secret services. They want to disturb the democratic movements. They want to try to bring unrest to our countries. Masha Gessen, she wrote Surviving Autocracy in 2020 ahead of the election in the US. Like Timothy Snyder, their analysis, they analyze the experience of Soviet and Russian dictatorship to explain what currently happens in the United States. Gessen shows how Donald Trump mangles words and takes away their meaning, and how fake news means whatever he says it means. Fake news. The desire to go back to the past is masterfully taken up by the winner of the International Booker Prize in 2023. The Bulgarian writer Georgi Gospodinov describes how whole countries are desperately trying to agree upon to which glorious year of their history they want to go back to, they want to return to, because they cannot stand to live in the present and they cannot see a desirable future. His novel is called Time Shelter. If we do not change our ways of life, if we follow the ideas of the earlier mentioned Heritage Foundation in the United States that says in their playbook that I mentioned also that it is urgent and necessary that America tries to get as much oil and gas into their possession as possible and just drill, baby, drill, as the candidate wants, we will not talk much about sunny or rainy weather in the years to come, but about fire weather. American-Canadian journalist John Vaillant has written an absolutely brilliant book about the Great Fire in Fort McMurray in Alberta in Canada in 2016. And he urges us to think and act now before the weather might become the only weather on a planet that warms up more every year due to our horrendous treatment of the planet, by reading and learning why everything is quite terrible now, and by understanding that democracy is not perfect, but the best alternative there is, and that the dignity of every human being should be at the core of how we all live and treat each other, we might be able to turn things around so that they are less terrible in some years from now. And maybe even really okay-ish when our newly born or unborn grandchildren finish high school and dream about their futures in 15, 20, or 25 years. We also need to be honest about our past to make the world a better place by admitting the wrongdoings of our ancestors and maybe even grandparents. We do not get weaker, we do not get sick, we grow as humans. Literature helps enormously to understand other perspectives and other cultures. Books are one of the greatest treasures. They don't need to be banned. They need to be read and discussed. One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world, says Peace Nobel laureate Malala Yousafzai. Love and peace to all of you. I'll see you soon. Bye.